With Pat Sajak's stint as Wheel of Fortune host at its end, it's time to look back on his fascinating life, which has been filled with controversial comments, a frightening medical scare, and a surprising connection to a comedy legend. Patrick Leonard Sajak was born in Chicago on October 26, 1946, and remained there into his college years. It was in the Windy City that he initially became interested in broadcasting. He got his first taste when he was chosen as a teen disc jockey on a Saturday show for WLS Radio. Then he got a graveyard shift as a radio newsman on WDEC to help with college. More broadcasting opportunities opened up for Sajak when he joined the military in 1968 in the midst of the Vietnam War. He served most of his time behind the host's desk for the American Forces Vietnam Network morning show. He played music and also shouted out, "Good morning, Vietnam," the line made famous by his fellow DJ Adrian Cronauer, who was played by Robin Williams in the movie of the same name. Sajak was also responsible for managing broadcasts to the troops, which once led to a rather embarrassing mistake. President Richard Nixon was giving a Christmas speech in 1969, and when he paused, Sajak mistook it for the end of the speech, so he switched back over to the playlist. He kept the music going even after he realized that Nixon wasn't done, which meant that the president's acknowledgement to the troops went unheard that year. Based on his earliest forays into broadcasting, Sajak didn't exactly seem like he was destined to become a game show host. After being discharged from the Army in 1970, he ended up in the Washington, D.C. area. Alas, with no ready opportunities presenting themselves, he turned to clerical work to get by. But then a tip from a friend led him to Murray, Kentucky, and a return to the airwaves in 1971. That gig put Sajak back in the role of disc jockey, but he wanted to move on. After a frustrating job search, he broke into local TV on NBC's Nashville affiliate WSM. He spent 5 years with the station, eventually garnering notice for his stints presenting the daily forecast. Among those watching were recruiters for another NBC affiliate in Los Angeles, who brought Sajak out west to be their weatherman for morning and evening broadcasts. He was splitting his time between predicting the Los Angeles weather and hosting a Sunday talk show, and Merv Griffin came calling with the offer to take over Wheel of Fortune.
My heart is going fast.
When Pat Sajak became host of Wheel of Fortune in 1981, he assumed that the show was on its last legs and that he'd be moving on to other things soon. Instead, Wheel got a second lease on life, and Sajak's star rose with it. He even managed to become popular enough to be considered a potential talk show host. At that time, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was the undisputed ratings king of late night. But rival networks were desperate to compete, and CBS thought that the Pat Sajak Show might do the trick. When the show premiered in 1989, Sajak had some reservations. One of the things he liked about his Wheel of Fortune gig was that it was his primary focus. He was a private man, and he realized that he would have to be at least slightly more revealing if he became a talk show host. On the other hand, it was an opportunity to be less guarded in his humor. He later looked back on this stint as a career highlight, but CBS's hopes of seriously challenging Carson weren't meant to be, as the Pat Sajak Show lasted only 18 months. As the host of a popular game show, Sajak regularly works with contestants whose nerves can run high. Generally, he finds that it's not too appealing for the host to get too mean when they make mistakes. After a few harsh incidents early in his tenure, Sajak learned to temper his comments and project a more genial manner. But sometimes the routine of a daily game show can get a little tiring, and the host might look for ways to relieve the monotony. During the early days of Wheel of Fortune, the show didn't give out cash to the winners, but instead tacky prizes. Taping was often a bore, and the time it took to turn around the set was significant. So during hours-long meal breaks, Sajak and his co-host Vanna White would frequent a restaurant across the street from the studio that made some mean margaritas.
Van and I would go across and have 2 or 3 or 6, and then come and do the last shows and have trouble recognizing the alphabet. They're really good tapes to get hold of.
To the casual TV viewer, Pat Sajak is simply the affable host of Wheel of Fortune. But if you're aware of his online presence, you might be familiar with his other reputation as a conservative political commentator. And his political thoughts aren't confined to social media, as he's been writing for conservative outlets for years. Sajak's first published political article was for the National Review in 2010. He opined in the piece that public employees who have a larger stake in certain elections should potentially face limits on their participation in those elections. He didn't call for taking away federal workers' voting rights wholesale, but he did suggest that they should be excluded from voting on certain ballot initiatives that would directly impact their jobs and benefits. This op-ed inspired a counter-argument in New York Magazine, which noted the slippery slope nature of Sajak's proposal, while also declaring, "We'd like to buy a vowel. O for oh God, what an outrageously bad idea." Sajak went on to contribute some more opinion pieces for the conservative outlets Ricochet and Human Events. Some are fairly innocuous, like a frank assessment of unhealthy online habits that he's fallen into. Others amount to little more than unmasked contempt for left-wing American politics. Of all of Sajak's forays into politics, his remarks on the climate may just be the most extreme. He has a history of denying the reality of man-made climate change, and he's taken to social media on multiple occasions to say so. He's also had plenty to say about climate scientists and activists. In 2014, for example, he tweeted, I now believe global warming alarmists are unpatriotic racists, knowingly misleading for their own ends. Sajak later walked back that tweet as deliberate hyperbole. He also eventually scrubbed his account of the accusation of racism, as well as a comparison of climate change to the tooth fairy, and a facetious prediction of a movement for plants' rights.
Maybe Sajak was joking, but he certainly sparked a firestorm with this tweet.
Since 2004, Pat Sajak has been associated with the private Christian Hillsdale College. The Michigan-based school was founded by abolitionists in 1844. It kept a more open admissions policy than other colleges and maintains a liberal arts curriculum centered around Western philosophy with only a modest focus on its Baptist roots. Students and observers have found classes engaging, as opposed to an uncritical parodying of conservative groupthink. But Hillsdale has also become a committed advocate of limited government, and to that end, it has refused any public funding. A side effect of this is the school's exemption from Title IX regulations, and its track record for admitting queer students and people of color has come under critical scrutiny. Sajak spent 15 years as vice chairman of Hillsdale's Board of Trustees, and then in 2019, he stepped up to the role of chairman. Sajak's retirement from Wheel of Fortune briefly inspired questions about his work for Hillsdale, but it was soon confirmed that he wasn't retiring from the board. As chairman, he is committed to expanding Hillsdale's outreach beyond alumni. In November 2019, Sajak appeared in fine form when he spoke at the Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony for producer Harry Friedman. But then, just a few days later, a Wheel of Fortune taping was abruptly canceled when Sajak was rushed to the hospital for emergency intestinal surgery. Vanna White temporarily took over the show as her co-host recovered. Sajak had been taking his usual morning walk with his daughter Maggie, but when he got home, he realized that something was wrong.
Suddenly, I had this horrific pain in my stomach.
Sajak's intestines had become entangled and started putting pressure on each other. Such a condition can be fatal if it's not addressed quickly. Sajak managed to get into surgery within 2 hours of his first symptoms, but his blood pressure was so low that his surgeon needed to wait for it to elevate to begin the operation. His family and doctors were unsure if he would even make it through, and while he was under the influence of painkillers, he experienced a sensation of impending death. Fortunately, though, the surgery was a complete success, and he was able to return to work without any complications. For decades, the late Jeopardy host Alex Trebek stood alongside Pat Sajak as two of the most iconic game show hosts on TV, and over the years, the two of them collaborated for a series of lighthearted stunts. In 1997, for example, they concocted some April Fool's surprises, as Trebek assumed hosting duties for Wheel of Fortune while Sajak and Vanna White acted as contestants playing for charity. Meanwhile, Sajak was a guest host of a Jeopardy episode that featured several categories inspired by his own show. While attending the Daytime Emmy Awards in 2011, Sajak and Trebek gave a joint interview to We Love Soaps TV. When they were asked if they were friends away from the cameras, they confirmed that they were indeed. But Trebek added a caveat by noting, "People ask if we socialize. We don't. Pat spends half of his life living on the East Coast and I live in Los Angeles. And we're friends, but we do not socialize." Trebek also mentioned that it was rare for the active game show hosts to mingle in their private lives, but they still had enough encounters outside of work for Sajak to get to know Trebek's family. And after Trebek's death from pancreatic cancer in November 2020, Sajak offered a warm tribute in which he praised his professionalism and family. In addition to hosting Wheel of Fortune, writing for conservative outlets, and serving on the board of a college, Pat Sajak has been busy indulging in his love of baseball. As a Chicago native, he grew up watching the Cubs and the White Sox, two teams he still supports without picking a favorite. He's also added the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Baltimore Orioles to his list of favorite clubs as he's moved around the country. As he admitted to Sports Illustrated in 2002, "I'm politically correct on sporting teams, if nothing else. I could throw the Los Angeles Angels in there as well."
Yeah, I get both leagues and the best of both worlds.
Sajak was never particularly skilled on the diamond himself, but he has at times sought greater involvement in the baseball world. He hosted a short-lived weekly talk show on MLB radio called the Pat Sajak Baseball Hour, which put him in contact with people from every corner of the league. Before that, he even went so far as buying the independent Golden Baseball League. Only 10 teams strong, the league didn't quite make it to a full decade of existence, but by Sajak's estimation, over 100 of its players went on to the majors. In 2021, Wheel of Fortune became a family affair for Pat Sajak, as his daughter Maggie Sajak became host of the show's online arm. She conducted backstage interviews with contestants and crew members and guided viewers through the show's inner workings. Born in 1995, Maggie was a frequent visitor to the Wheel set during her childhood. She briefly dabbled in country music and earned a law degree before joining her dad as a regular on Wheel. Maggie has an older brother named Patrick, but he's taken a rather different career track than his dad and sister. On a May 2021 episode of Wheel of Fortune, the elder Pat Sajak announced that his son had completed medical school.
The only troubling part is he insists that I call him Dr. Sajak.
Pat also joked that he wanted Patrick to go into geriatrics, but he refused.